Hey everyone, ready to unlock some serious learning power today?
I am.
We're doing a deep dive into Scott H. Young's Get Better at Anything.
Oh, I love that book.
It's a book that promises to transform how we approach skill mastery.
And it delivers.
Really?
You know how people say practice makes perfect?
Yeah.
Young digs way deeper, showing us why simple practice isn't enough.
Okay.
And revealing the surprising factors that separate true experts from the rest of us.
Okay, so picture this.
Okay.
It's the early days of Tetris, right?
Right.
Now fast forward to today.
Okay.
Those old high scores are getting demolished.
Wow.
New players are reaching levels the original designers thought were impossible.
It's not just that they've had more time to practice.
Right.
It's a perfect illustration of how the learning environment itself has evolved. Think about it. We've got online forums, video tutorials, people live streaming their Tetris triumphs.
Yeah.
You can practically download the strategies of the best players in the world.
So you're saying it's more than just the time spent?
Way more. Young calls this the power of C, having access to quality examples and knowledge.
That's wild. It's like having a cheat code for learning.
In a way, it is.
So we've got C, the ability to learn from others.
Right, but it doesn't stop there.
There's more.
This Tetris example actually highlights one of the 3 core factors Scott Young identifies in mastering any skill.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Lay it on me.
So you've got C, right?
Right.
The ability to learn from others.
Sure.
But then there's do.
Do.
And this isn't just about mindlessly repeating the same thing.
Okay.
It's about strategic, focused practice.
Okay.
And finally, you need feedback. But we're not just talking about praise or criticism. It's about calibrating your efforts against reality, figuring out why something worked or didn't, and adjusting your approach.
So it's not a solo mission. It's about having the right resources, the right practice, and the right feedback. I like it. Now, one thing that really jumped out at me from the book was how it debunked this whole brain training craze. Like, if I just do enough Sudoku, I'll become some kind of super thinker.
Yeah.
Turns out, not so much.
It's a common misconception.
Really?
While those brain games can be fun, research shows that skills are built from these things called production rules.
Production rules.
Essentially, if-then statements our brains create. We learn specific patterns, not general thinking muscles.
Oh, right.
Think of it like this. Every time you tie your shoelaces, you're not exercising some general shoelace tying muscle.
Right.
Your brain has created a specific set of instructions for that task.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So no shortcuts to becoming a genius then?
Not through brain games, that's for sure.
Oh, no.
But hold on, don't despair.
Okay.
The good news is that by understanding how these production rules work, we can be much more strategic about our learning.
All right, I'm listening. How do we do that?
One powerful technique Young highlights is the power of copying. He talks about artists who meticulously copied masterpieces, not to forge them, but to internalize the patterns and techniques of the masters. It's about immersing yourself in those production rules until they become second nature.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So if I wanted to write, say, Margaret Atwood,
Yeah.
I should start by copying out passages of her work.
Exactly. By doing that, you're essentially reverse engineering her writing style,
Wow.
absorbing her sentence structure, her rhythm, even her word choice.
Wow, I've never thought about it like that. That's a game changer. So what other learning hacks does Young have up his sleeve?
He emphasizes the importance of racking up small wins, especially early on.
A small win?
He uses the example of Helen Keller's breakthrough with language. It wasn't just her teacher's persistence.
Yeah.
It was the moment Helen connected the feeling of running water to the word water that sparked her motivation to learn more. Those aha moments are crucial, especially when tackling complex skills.
It's like leveling up in a video game. Those early wins keep you hooked. So, small victories, got it. What else?
Variety is key. Don't just repeat the same thing over and over.
Okay.
Young talks about how jazz musicians practice variations on a theme, building flexibility and adaptability in their playing. They're essentially training their brains to improvise and respond creatively to different musical situations.
That makes a lot of sense. So if you're learning a language, don't just stick to the textbook dialogues, try having real conversations, even if they're messy at first?
Precisely.
Okay.
Now, get this, Young also talks about how quantity can lead to quality.
Okay.
He uses the example of Thomas Edison and his thousands of light bulb failures.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
I thought it was all about focusing on a few perfect creations.
It's a common misconception.
Really?
Think about it.
Hmm.
Each failure is actually valuable data.
Okay.
It tells you what doesn't work, which in turn brings you closer to what does.
Huh.
Edison wasn't just blindly tinkering, he was systematically eliminating possibilities. The sheer volume of his experiments increased his chances of stumbling upon the solution.
So it's like the more you experiment and explore, the more likely you are to have those breakthrough moments.
Exactly. It's about embracing the process, the iterations, even the missteps.
Okay.
It's about recognizing that the path to mastery is rarely linear.
So it's not a straight line to success.
Yep.
Lots of twists and turns along the way.
Exactly.
This is also fascinating. It's making me rethink my whole approach to learning. One thing I'm curious about is this idea of quantity leading to quality. You mentioned Edison and his light bulb experiments, but what about fields where it's not so much about invention, but about, say, judgment or intuition? Like, can you really get good at poker just by playing a ton of hands?
That's where the feedback part of the equation becomes absolutely crucial. You see, our brains are amazing at finding patterns, but they can also be tricked by them, especially in fields with a lot of uncertainty, like poker or investing our intuition can lead us astray.
So you're saying even with years of experience, we can't always trust our gut. Does that mean we should just hand over all our decisions to algorithms?
Not necessarily. It's not about becoming robots. It's about recognizing the limitations of our intuition and using feedback to calibrate it. Think of it like this. Imagine you're learning to play the piano. You could just noodle around on the keys and hope for the best. Or you could use a metronome to give you precise feedback on your timing and rhythm.
Right.
The metronome helps you calibrate your internal sense of timing, making you a more accurate and expressive player.
That's a great analogy. So it's about finding ways to get that kind of precise, objective feedback in whatever field we're trying to master. But what about those situations where the feedback isn't so clear-cut? Like, how do you know if you're making progress in something like leadership or decision-making?
That's where finding the right environment becomes paramount. Remember Jung's idea of situated learning?
Yeah.
Sometimes the best way to learn is to be immersed in the environment where the skill is actually used.
Right, like those flight simulators you mentioned earlier.
Exactly. Now, while flight simulators provide an ideal environment for situated learning, not all fields have such sophisticated setups. That's where finding the right mentor becomes invaluable. Think of a mentor as your guide in that complex environment. They've already navigated the terrain, so to speak, and they can help you avoid the pitfalls and dead ends.
So it's about finding someone who can provide that calibrated feedback and guidance in a real-world context, like having a personal Sherpa for your learning expedition.
Exactly. And it's not just about finding one perfect mentor. It's about building a network of mentors, people who can offer different perspectives and support your growth in different ways.
So it's like building a personal board of advisors for your learning journey.
Precisely. And this brings us to another crucial point. The importance of recognizing that the path to mastery is rarely linear. There will be setbacks, plateaus, and times when we need to unlearn as much as we learn.
Ugh, tell me about it. I've definitely had those moments where I felt like I was hitting a wall, like no matter how much I practiced, I just couldn't seem to get any better.
It's a common experience, and Jung argues that it's often in those moments of frustration that we need to be the most willing to re-examine our assumptions and try new approaches.
You mean like question everything we thought we knew? That sounds terrifying.
It can be, but it can also be incredibly liberating. Think of it like this. You've been using the same technique for months, and you've plateaued. Your instinct might be to just practice harder, to power through it. But what if the technique itself is flawed? What if you need to completely rethink your approach?
Okay, I'm starting to see what you mean. And so how do we know when it's time for that kind of radical overhaul? What are the warning signs that our expertise might actually be holding us back?
One major red flag is persistent frustration. That feeling of hitting a wall and not being able to break through another is when you see others achieving a level of mastery that seems out of reach, even though you're putting in the effort.
So it's about being honest with ourselves and recognizing when our current approach just isn't working. But that's easier said than done, right? I mean, it takes a lot of courage to admit that we might need to start over, to unlearn what we thought we knew.
Absolutely. It can be one of the most challenging aspects of the learning process, but it's often in those moments of unlearning and rebuilding that we experience the most profound growth.
So it's like tearing down an old building to make way for a new, more magnificent structure.
Precisely. And just like with demolition, unlearning can be messy and uncomfortable, but it's often a necessary step in the journey toward mastery. This is all so incredibly insightful. It's making me rethink my whole relationship with learning. And speaking of relationships, there's one more aspect of Jung's book that I want to delve into, this idea that fear is often the biggest obstacle to mastery.
Hmm.
Yes. This is where Jung's insights really hit home for a lot of people because, let's face it, fear is a powerful force. It can keep us stuck in our comfort zones, preventing us from taking risks and pursuing our full potential.
You know, hearing you talk about facing our fears head on,
Yeah.
it reminds me of something else Jung discussed. This
Okay.
idea that sometimes to truly master something, we need to get worse before we get better.
Right.
That whole unlearning curve
Yeah.
concept.
Yeah, it's such a powerful and often overlooked aspect of learning, isn't it?
Yeah.
We can get so attached to our habits,
Totally.
our ways of doing things, even when they're no longer serving us.
It's so true. It's like that saying, if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always gotten.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Sometimes our existing knowledge and habits can become blinders, preventing us from seeing new possibilities.
Mm.
Think about it in the context of, say, learning a new language.
Okay.
If you've always spoken English, you've internalized a certain grammatical structure,
Right.
a certain way of constructing sentences.
Yeah.
When you start learning a new language,
Yeah.
those old patterns can actually interfere with your ability to grasp the new ones.
Oh, I've totally experienced that. It's like my brain wants to translate everything directly instead of embracing the new language's structure.
Precisely.
Wow.
And in those cases, unlearning those old patterns can be just as important as learning the new ones.
So how do we do that? How do we know when it's time to hit the reset button on our learning?
Right.
And how do we actually go about unlearning those ingrained habits?
Well, as we touched upon earlier, persistent frustration or hitting a plateau can be a sign that it's time to reevaluate our approach.
Okay.
If you're putting in the effort but not seeing the results, it might be time to shake things up.
Okay, so you realize you're stuck in a rut. What's next?
Right.
How do you actually go about unlearning something?
Well, it often starts with awareness.
Okay.
Paying attention to those moments when you're relying on old habits that are no longer serving you.
Okay.
Once you've identified those patterns, you can start to consciously choose a different approach.
So it's about being mindful, present in the learning process.
Exactly. And this is where having a mentor or a coach can be invaluable.
Okay.
They can observe your process from an outside perspective and offer insights that you might be blind to.
It's like having an extra set of eyes, someone to point out those blind spots we all have.
Exactly.
Mm.
And it's not just about identifying the areas where you need to unlearn.
Right.
It's also about having the courage to let go of those old patterns, even if they've served you well in the past.
It's about embracing the discomfort of growth, right?
Okay.
Realizing that sometimes taking a step back is the only way to move forward.
Precisely.
Hmm.
And as you start to unlearn those old habits and replace them with new ones, you may find that your progress actually accelerates.
Really?
It's like you've removed the roadblocks that were holding you back.
That's so encouraging to hear. So unlearning is not a sign of failure, but rather a necessary part of the growth process.
Absolutely. It's a sign that you're evolving,
Okay.
that you're open to new possibilities.
Mm.
And as you continue on your journey of mastery, remember that unlearning is an ongoing process.
Yeah.
There will always be new challenges, new plateaus to overcome.
Right.
But by embracing the principles we've discussed today,
Yeah.
the power of see, do, and feedback,
Right.
the importance of variability, the courage to unlearn, and the willingness to face our fears,
Yes.
you can navigate those challenges with confidence and achieve extraordinary results in any area of your life.
This deep dive has been absolutely incredible. I feel like I've gained a whole new toolkit for learning and growth.
It's been a pleasure sharing these insights with you.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. This has been amazing.
Of course, thanks for having me.
And to all our listeners out there, we hope this deep dive has inspired you to unlock your own potential and pursue mastery in all areas of your life. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep diving deep.